That concludes the opening statements of members by the subcommittee. We have our first panel of witnesses before us. Our panel that we have is Mr. Gregory Kuntz, who is the Managing Director of Forensic Audits and Special Investigations at the Government Accountability Office, GAO. Dr. Jerry Meinenkopf, who is the Director of the Office of Human Research Protections at the Department of Health and Human Services. Dr. Joanne Less, who is the Director of the Good Clinical Practice Program at the Food and Drug Administration, and Mr. Daniel Duber, who is the Chief Executive Officer at Coast IRB, LLC. It's a policy of this subcommittee to take all testimony under oath. Please be advised that you have the right under rules of the House to be advised by counsel during your testimony. Do you wish to be represented by counsel? If so, would you state your counsel's name? Mr. Kurtz, Dr. Less, Dr. Meinenkopf, Mr. Duber?
Jonathan Emord.
Okay, Jonathan.
Emord.
Okay, would you spell that, please, for the...
E-M-O-R-D.
Okay, during your testimony, if you want to stop and confer with him, that'll be fine. He cannot testify, but he would give you advice, that's fine. Okay, it's a policy of this subcommittee to take all testimony under oath, so I'm going to ask you to please rise, raise your right hand, take the oath. You swear or affirm the testimony you're about to give to be the truth, the whole truth, nothing but the truth, a matter pending before this committee?
I do.
Let the record reflect the witnesses affirm that they are acknowledge that they will reply in the affirmative. They are now under oath. We will proceed with your opening 5-minute statement. Mr. Kuntz, we'll start with you, please, sir.
Mr. Chairman and members of the subcommittee, thank you for the opportunity to discuss institutional review boards. Our investigation relates principally to private IRBs that authorize human subject testing. Today's testimony highlights the results of our investigation of the IRB system. My testimony has two parts. First, I will provide some very brief background, and second, I will discuss the results of our investigation. First, as several of you have mentioned, federal regulations governing human subject testing evolved from society's horrified reaction to several cases. For example, there were the forced medical experiments on countless Holocaust victims. In the U.S., we had the 40-year Tuskegee study. In this case, hundreds of poor, mostly illiterate African-American men were not properly treated for syphilis so that the effects of this disease could be studied. Today, IRBs play a critical role in the safety and protection of human subjects. With this background in mind, let me move on to our results. Our investigation found that the current system is highly vulnerable to unethical or incompetent actors. We tested the IRB system with two separate but related undercover operations. The objective of the first operation was to see if an actual IRB would authorize our bogus medical device company to conduct human subject testing. The objective of our second operation was to determine whether a real medical research company would hire our bogus IRB. If successful, this would show that the bogus IRB could have authorized human subject testing. First, our bogus medical device protocol was approved by a real IRB even though we had no medical expertise. Our bogus device, which we called AdhesiBlock, was a post-surgical healing device for women that matched several FDA descriptions of a significant risk device. We created our protocol and fictitious device using information that was publicly available and on the Internet. The monitors show excerpts from the IRB board meeting where our protocols were unanimously approved and AdhesiBlock was referred to as being probably very safe. As shown on the monitor, some due diligence would have shown a mailbox as our suite or office, a fictitious lead researcher with a fabricated medical license and resume, a fabricated FDA marketing approval for our device, and a cell phone as the only number we provided. The next picture on the monitor shows a coupon that this IRB provided, which got our attention. Given that we're dealing with experimental research on human beings, we were surprised that anybody would offer discount coupons for this service. This IRB is no fly-by-night operation. They are currently the IRB of record for over 70 federally funded projects, and according to their own press release, have overseen thousands of trials. 2 other IRBs we sent these very same protocols to had a very different response. The Monitor shows examples of their comments, including, "This protocol was awful and a piece of junk. The riskiest thing I've ever seen. The odds of approval were 0%. And my favorite comment, did somebody approve it? Oh boy." For the IRB that approved our study, the only due diligence they appeared to perform was after they received a letter from this subcommittee. After receiving this letter, the IRB was able to determine, for example, that our lead researcher and FDA marketing approval were in fact bogus. However, this IRB had already approved our bogus device for human subject testing 4 months before receiving your letter. For our second operation, we created a bogus private IRB. Once again, we used phony company officials and a mailbox as our business address. We registered our IRB online with HHS and created a website that looked like the websites that other IRBs used. Then we went fishing. We advertised our services on the internet and in newspapers to see if a real researcher or researchers would contact us. The monitors show our advertisements. Notice that we emphasize the speed of our reviews, our HHS approval, and guaranteed results. We did refrain from offering discount coupons as part of our advertising campaign. In response to these ads, our bogus IRB received protocols from one company and inquiries from 5 others. The company sending us its protocols was seeking approval to add a new test site for ongoing trials. Our bogus IRB, which, as I mentioned, had absolutely no medical expertise, could have authorized human subject testing at this site. However, we told this company that we couldn't review their protocols because we were experiencing significant financial problems due to the current economic crisis. In conclusion, every year millions of Americans submit themselves to experimental research. These people are among our nation's poorest and most vulnerable. I can't tell you whether our 2 undercover successful tests are isolated cases or the tip of the iceberg. What I can tell you is that given the history of human subject testing, it's hard to believe that anybody could be comfortable with the integrity of the current system. Mr. Chairman, that ends my statement, and I look forward to your questions.
Thank you, Mr. Kreutz. Dr. Les, your opening statement, please. And for all the witnesses, if you have a longer statement than 5 minutes, they'll be included in the record.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. Good morning, Mr. Chairman and members of the subcommittee. I'm Joanne Less, Director of the Good Clinical Practice Program at the FDA. I appreciate your invitation to appear here today to discuss FDA's role in overseeing institutional review boards. For over 40 years, FDA has been committed to protecting the rights, safety, and welfare of subjects who participate in clinical trials of FDA-regulated products. The obligation to protect individuals who volunteer for research and assume research risks in order to advance public health and biomedical knowledge is integral to FDA's mission, and the agency continually strives to strengthen and promote human subject protections. While measures to protect subjects are incorporated into all aspects and all stages of clinical trial, perhaps human subject protection is most clearly embodied in 2 critical activities. The first is the requirement to obtain voluntary, legally effective, informed consent from each study subject. The second is the requirement for independent ethical review of each clinical trial. The responsibility for human subject protection is one that FDA shares with sponsors, clinical investigators, study monitors, and IRBs. Every party with a role in the conduct and management of the trial has clearly defined responsibilities under FDA's regulations. All of these parties must fulfill those duties and be vigilant in doing so, or subjects could be put at risk. This network of overlapping responsibilities is key to protecting the rights, safety, and welfare of subjects who participate in FDA-regulated trials. IRBs are a critically important component of this collaborative oversight system. The primary purpose of IRB review is to assure the protection of the rights, safety, and welfare of human subjects. An IRB has the authority to approve, require modifications in, or disapprove research. To approve a study, the IRB must determine that all of the following criteria are met. The risks to subjects are minimized, the risks are reasonable in relationship to anticipated benefits, selection of subjects is equitable, and informed consent will be obtained and documented. The IRB may require modifications to the protocol, informed consent, or study procedures before it approves the study. An IRB may disapprove a study due to protocol deficiencies or for reasons such as limited availability of suitable subjects. Once a study begins, IRBs are responsible for reviewing changes to research. IRBs have the authority to suspend or terminate approval of research that has been associated with unexpected serious harm to subjects. There are different types of IRBs. Most IRBs are established and operated by universities, hospitals, and other institutions. These IRBs are comprised primarily of volunteers from the institution's faculty and staff. A small number of IRBs, often referred to as independent IRBs, are not affiliated with such an institution. Independent IRBs may provide reviews for industry-sponsored projects conducted outside a university or hospital, for example, in a doctor's office. FDA applies the same oversight, scrutiny, and inspectional practices to all types of IRBs. The agency places a higher priority on inspecting IRBs that are new, that have not been previously inspected, that had previously been found to be out of compliance, or that are reviewing research involving high-risk products or vulnerable populations. During these inspections, FDA investigators select one or more studies in the IRB's inventory. The inspector reviews the IRB procedures and records, follows the selected studies through the entire process, and interviews key staff. FDA also conducts for-cause inspections of IRBs for which there have been complaints. During a for-cause inspection, FDA focuses on the issue identified in the complaint and determines if there is evidence to substantiate it. If the FDA investigator uncovers a regulatory violation, the agency may take further action. For minor deviations, FDA generally issues a letter describing the deficiency and provides reference to the relevant regulations or guidance. For more serious violations, FDA may issue a warning letter requesting that the IRB submit a corrective action plan within 15 days. FDA generally conducts a follow-up inspection to ensure that the violations were corrected. The agency may also impose administrative sanctions on an IRB. For example, FDA may withhold approval of studies that are reviewed by the IRB, direct that no new subjects be enrolled in ongoing studies, or terminate all ongoing studies. Because the clinical trials process has significantly evolved since FDA issued some of its regulations, FDA launched an initiative aimed at modernizing and strengthening the agency's oversight of clinical trials. FDA issued a number of guidances with the expectation that they will reduce burdens, improve IRB's efficiency, and allow IRBs to give more attention to critical human subject protection activities. Earlier this year, FDA issued regulations that will require all IRBs to register through an electronic system. This will enable the agency to more precisely identify IRBs that review FDA-regulated research, assist us in providing educational information, and help us to identify IRBs for inspection. FDA has also established a task force to ensure that all pending and future recommendations related to the agency's oversight of clinical trials raised by Congress, the HHS Office of the Inspector General, and the General Accountability Office are fully addressed. Finally, although FDA has traditionally conducted the majority of its inspections in association with the submission of a marketing application, the agency has been shifting more of its resources to inspections of ongoing studies. This will allow the agency to identify potential problems while the study is still active, enabling implementation of corrective actions to minimize risk to subjects and preserve the integrity of the trial. FDA has also been improving its follow-up of violative inspections and working to identify alternative methods to select IRBs for inspection. It is FDA's strong belief that educating IRB members, chairs, and administrators fosters understanding of the human subject protection regulations and enhances their ability to protect subjects participating in research. To that end, in partnership with OHRP and other organizations, FDA participates in numerous national and regional conferences and workshops. In conclusion, FDA remains committed to strengthening human subject protection and improving its oversight of IRBs and other parties that conduct, oversee, and manage clinical trials. FDA has taken steps to ensure that recommendations regarding the agency's oversight of clinical trials, including IRBs, are fully addressed. While FDA has already implemented a number of changes to its clinical trial oversight activities, the agency continues to look for and welcome input about new approaches to fulfill these responsibilities. This concludes my statement. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Dr. Meinkoff. Your opening statement, please, sir.
Yes. Good morning, Mr. Chairman and members of the subcommittee. I'm Jerry Menikoff, Director of the Office for Human Research Protections, which is within the Department of Health and Human Services. I previously served as the Director of the office that oversees the NIH's Human Research Protection Program. Before that, for almost a decade, I chaired the Institutional Review Board at the University of Kansas Medical Center. The Department's commitment to human subjects protection spans more than 3 decades. In 1974, what was then known as the Department of HEW issued its first department-wide human subject protection regulations. OHRP is charged with enforcing the current regulations, which are in 45 CFR Part 46. OHRP's mission is to protect the rights, welfare, and well-being of subjects involved in research conducted or supported by the department. The responsibility for protecting research subjects is one that OHRP shares with the FDA, agencies that fund research, institutions that conduct the research, investigators who carry out that research, and the IRBs that review it. Everyone with a role in human subjects research must fulfill their duty to protect the subjects, or else those subjects could be at undue risk. The core provisions of the Department's current human subjects regulations cover 3 major areas. First, institutions conducting HHS-funded research must enter into an agreement called an assurance, agreeing to comply with the regulations. Second, a committee called an Institutional Review Board, or IRB, must review and approve the research before enrollment of any subject. The IRB thus plays a central role in ensuring that the rights, safety, and welfare of subjects are adequately protected. Third, the research must be conducted consistent with the regulations, which generally require obtaining the informed consent of the subjects and the IRB's continuing review of the research. The Department's regulation, in addition, provides special protections for various populations considered to be vulnerable. Besides the regulations administered by OHRP, there are other federal regulations for protecting research subjects. The FDA has its own set of regulations. These apply to clinical trials involving products regulated by FDA. These regulations are substantially similar to those administered by OHRP, though there are some differences. In 1991, 14 other federal departments and agencies joined HHS in adopting a uniform set of regulations that are identical to the core portion of the HHS regulations. This set of regulations is often referred to as the Common Rule. For all participating federal departments and agencies, the Common Rule outlines the same basic provisions for IRBs, informed consent, and assurance agreements. As I noted, the Department's regulations require that institutions that are engaged in HHS-funded research must sign an agreement with OHRP known as an assurance. Through this assurance, the institution commits itself to have all its HHS-funded research conducted in compliance with the regulations. Assurances must also include designation of 1 or more IRBs that will review the research covered by the assurance. The institution holds primary responsibility for ensuring that the IRBs it designates are appropriately qualified to review the types of research studies it conducts. The federal-wide assurance, or FWA, was introduced in 2000 and has been the only type of assurance accepted by OHRP since 2005. Previously, OHRP reviewed assurances using procedures that often involved lengthy discussions with institutions. In 1998, the HHS Office of Inspector General recommended that OHRP shift its focus and resources to other parts of the system so as to better protect research subjects. The current largely automated system for processing FWAs was implemented as a response to that OIG report. With the adoption of the FWA system in 2000, a new requirement was added. Any IRB designated under an FWA must be registered with OHRP. The process for registering an IRB with OHRP is separate from the process for obtaining an FWA, but the two are related. This registration process was implemented in response to a recommendation from that same OIG report. The report recommended a simple registration system which would collect minimal descriptive information such as location and contact information. This simplified registration system would still allow HRP and FDA to communicate effectively with IRBs while maintaining the standards of protection for research subjects. The IRB registration process requires, among other things, submission of a list of IRB members identified by name, qualifications, and affiliations. OHRP generally accepts all IRB registration applications that include information showing compliance with the following requirements: that there are at least 5 IRB members, there are at least 1 person designated as a non-scientist and 1 designated as a scientist, and that there's at least 1 member designated as not affiliated with the institution. On January 15th of this year, both OHRP and FDA issued IRB registration rules. The two sets of registration rules are very harmonious and will be implemented through a single web-based IRB registration system. In conclusion, the protection of research subject remains a highest priority for both the department and for OHRP. We continue to work on ways to better achieve that goal and very much welcome any recommendations that the subcommittee may have. Thank you for this opportunity to address you. I'll be pleased to answer any questions.
Thank you, Dr. Meinenkopf. Mr. Gruber, your opening statement, please, sir.
Good morning. Coast IRB recently submitted the product in question, adhesia block, to an independent forensic toxicological lab. That lab determined, as we did, as our board did on October 30th, that the product was safe. Here is the conclusion by two top forensic toxicologists in the United States. It is my opinion, within a reasonable degree of scientific certainty, there is no sound scientific foundation for finding the constituents in the adhesia block gel described in clinical study protocol pilot study of safety and efficacy of 2.5% adhesia block gel to reduce adhesions following peritoneal cavity surgery, device clinical study protocol number P-D015 version 1.4, unsafe at the dose recommended for testing. In October of 2008, the Government Accountability Office, at the behest of this committee, perpetrated an extensive fraud against my company, Coast IRB LLC. It did so without probable cause that Coast had committed any crime. Indeed, no one at Coast has committed any crime. It did so without involving the executive branch. It did so without satisfying any of the legal safeguards that the Department of Justice and the federal courts have in place. It acted without probable cause that a crime had been committed. If this committee's objective with this fraudulent and illegal GAO sting operation was to demonstrate that IRBs need to do more checking and verification of sponsor and PI licenses, verify the existence of companies and so on, fine, we will do that. And we have changed our SOPs to do just that because of this illegal fraud. But did you have to take the extremely negative approach of setting up an elaborate, expensive fraud? Yes, your fraud was very sophisticated, and you pulled the wool over our eyes. Congratulations. But you need to understand the effects of this charade. I personally have wasted 5 weeks of my valuable time defending the honor, integrity, and reputation of both our company and of me. We have spent many years building that. My company has now spent over $100,000 defending itself. And do you know what that means? That means that we now have to lay off at least 5 people at our company to pay for this. A much better and positive approach would have been for you to call a conference together of key IRB industry leaders, FDA, OHRP, and the committee to identify what needs to be fixed and what laws, regulations are needed to fix the problems. No one would have had to be harassed as Coast has with this sting. The GAO posed as a private business seeking review by my company of a medical device. It represented the medical device to be one that was substantially equivalent to a device approved for market by FDA. In an elaborate scheme, GAO violated federal and state laws, 1, by falsely representing itself to be a medical device company, 2, by submitting a fake clinical trial address, 3, by submitting a fraudulent protocol for a fraudulent medical device, 4, by submitting a forged CV for a fake principal investigator, 5, by falsely representing the medical device to be substantially equivalent to a device approved by FDA for market, 6, by submitting a fraudulent FDA 510K number for the device, 7, by submitting a fraudulent federal-wide assurance number, and 8, by forging a Commonwealth of Virginia medical license and license numbers for its supposed principal investigator. GAO also engaged in extensive verbal and email correspondence with Coast IRB in furtherance of the fraud. The fraud would have persisted to this day had I not discovered it and had Coast not terminated the clinical trial. Had I not discovered it following receipt of this committee's request for documents, I'm confident it would have been discovered before its next scheduled review of the trial in April next month. Mr. Chairman, it is the exclusive duty and province of the executive branch of this government to engage in law enforcement actions. By well-settled precedent, that branch alone may engage in clandestine stings upon probable cause that a crime has been committed. Innocent citizens of this country cannot be lawfully defrauded by their government. To hold otherwise replaces the rule of law with tyranny. Mr. Chairman, what the GAO has done at the request of this committee is unlawful. The actions here involve mail fraud, wire fraud, forging of a Commonwealth of Virginia medical license, false presentation of license numbers and 510K numbers, and false holding out of people to be physicians in the Commonwealth of Virginia. Coast has notified federal and state law enforcement of these crimes. These are crimes whether committed by the GAO or anyone else in the absence of probable cause. They are crimes for which those responsible should answer. Although we have informed law enforcement that GAO is behind them, a fact never affirmatively confirmed by your committee staff to me, we have asked that the crimes be investigated and that those responsible be prosecuted. Mr. Chairman, the question confronting me, and which I hope will occur to you, is whether this committee and the GAO have the lawful authority to defraud an innocent party to prove a political point. My question, sir, is whether this committee and the GAO are above the law. You know, I am just very, very saddened and disappointed in our government right now. I cannot believe my government did this to me and my company. It is unconscionable. But Coast IRB shares everyone's concern in this room about the need to improve our oversight system. We have been at the forefront in the past about the need, documenting the need for improvements in ICFs and IRB shopping and other categories. We want to work with the FDA and this committee to improve the system in a positive way. Thank you, and I'll be happy to answer any questions.